So good morning, everyone. My name is Charlotte Newman and I am Head of Sales here at Compleat Software. And a bit of background about me, I have been with Compleat since 2017. And over that time, I have worked and continue to work really closely with new customers across a variety of sectors and industries as they undertake procure-to-pay and purchase-to-pay projects with us here at Compleat. And I'm here today to talk to you about and show you how Compleat Software's products and services are supporting our customers specifically within education. So in today's session, I will take you through an introduction to Compleat's products and services and provide you with a high-level demonstration of one of our purchase-to-pay applications. If you do have any questions as we go through the session today, there is a chat box available on the bottom of your screen, so please feel free to pop any questions in there, and I have set aside some time at the end of the session to go through any questions that we do have come in. So starting the session today, we just have an example here of some of the key schools and multi-academy trusts that are already using Compleat. So we've got some fantastic case studies that we can share with you as well, including one from Whitehorse Federation. But really what's important to iterate here at the start of the conversation today is that Compleat is an accounting software and ERP agnostic solution that will support and automate that purchase to pay process for all types of education customers, whether you're an independent school or a large multi-academy trust. So when these customers and others initially reached out to Compleat, we identified that there were three sort of quite common reasons that they had for wanting to explore automation with us and the areas that they were keen to drive efficiencies in. So the first is the need to eliminate manual processes. So from manual data entry to printing invoices, walking around the school to get physical signatures on things, allocating coding against every single transaction that comes through, all of which can be incredibly time consuming and ultimately subject to human error. So we still see this coming through as very much the top driver for change and interest in our solutions and services. And I'm sure many of you attending today will empathise with that plight. The second most common theme that we saw is the lack of visibility and control around their current processes. So potentially purchases are being made ad hoc with suppliers. There's no sort of formal sign-off or visibility of spend before it's been made. Therefore, there's a lack of oversight of commitments, and often the first time that the finance team know that a cost has been committed is when that invoice arrives. And also with a decentralized process around ordering or invoice approvals, there's very often no visibility over the status of each transaction. And as such, things like accurate month-end accruals or a view of spend against budget can be incredibly difficult. The third point that we see most often as well is the desire to reduce costs. Now, we know that a lot of our education customers have had a very difficult 2 years, and reducing costs is always an important agenda topic, of course. But traditionally, even where potentially there are preferential prices that have been agreed with suppliers, making sure that these suppliers are used across multiple schools, multiple locations can be really difficult. And this is where purchase to pay automation is not just a background solution for finance, but it's also a solution for your teachers, for your heads of department, for other budget holders across all of your schools that want and need better control and visibility over their spend and require a solution to support in making more informed purchasing decisions. So very much a key driver for change there. So in terms of what Compleat offer and how we interact with these processes, ultimately Compleat extends and enhances the functionality within your existing accounting software around that purchase to pay or accounts payable process. So this is done across what we call the Compleat circle. So this starts with our Compleat front end applications, number one, enabling purchase to pay and accounts payable automation with built-in features and tools like integrated purchase requisitioning, online buying, dynamic approvals, invoice matching, and all of that integrates with that existing ERP or accounting software. Number two that you can see just there is our background piece of technology called Compleat Capture, which is the essential service at the core of everything that we offer, which extracts purchase invoice data from the documents that we receive on behalf of our customers. This process is driven by our own AI and machine learning technology, which converts invoice documents into digital data, which is then delivered down into one of our front-end applications for your review and further processing. Down to point three, so simply by capturing all header and line level invoice data using Compleat Capture, we're able to offer advanced spend analytics, which really revolutionises how supplier purchasing data is presented and evaluated, and provides real-time insight into your spend across procurement standard categories, suppliers, and broken down by school or even the number of pupils. So enabling our customers to benchmark potential cost savings and really evaluate in detail where they are spending their money. And finally, Compleat also offer point four here, which is a digital procurement service, where we can actually evaluate your advanced spend analytics data. And through activities such as supplier consolidation and through Compleat's relationships with key suppliers in the sector, you can start to realise your cost saving potential. So Compleat front-end applications are then used to ensure the delivery of those savings. And that takes us back to point one, and hence we have the Compleat circle. So with all of that in mind, today I am going to take you through a purchase to pay demonstration. Now, as I jump into the demonstration, I will turn my camera off because I have another screen that I'll be looking at and I don't want the side of my face to be a distraction. So I will just turn that off and I will jump into the demonstration. Okay, so what we are looking at now is our iComplete login screen. Compleat is a browser-based application, so every user that requires access to the software will just log in using an email address and a password. Now, when I land on my Compleat homepage dashboard, I'm presented with a number of different areas, a number of different quick links, and what I'm seeing on this home screen will all be dependent on the type of user that I am and the permissions that have been allocated for me. Now, permissions are very flexible, but we effectively have four key user types within the system. The first is an order user, so someone that has the ability to request a purchase, either manually creating a new order here or buying online with one of our integrated suppliers, and I'll come on to show you how that works. The second user type that we have is what we would call an AP operator or a finance user. So an individual that's going to be reviewing and managing invoices, potentially matching status against orders, allocating transaction coding and submitting those invoices out in the business for approval. The third user type that we have is therefore an approver, so someone that can be included in one of our predefined approval workflows, and those can be built out as you require, and that is a user that can approve your orders or invoices. And finally, the fourth user type that we have is an admin user, so someone that within your school, within your business, that has access to the system to interact with user permissions, company configuration, create workflows, etc. So what I'm seeing on the screen today is the view of the super user who's got access to everything. A couple of other key areas that we're looking at on the screen. The first here is useful information. So you'll be able to see that we have a e-invoicing email address, and this will be your trust or your individual school's name at capturemybills.com. And this is the unique e-invoicing email address that's provided to you as a customer. And this is how you get your purchase invoices into the system to go through that data capture process that I've just detailed to you, Compleat Capture. Now, you've got a number of different options here. You could provide this email address directly to your suppliers. If you've already got a centralized finance inbox, either centrally within a trust or centrally within each individual school, you can actually just create an email automation and auto forward those invoices through to this email address for data extraction. Now, any invoices that you are receiving in a paper format can also be scanned in and emailed to this email address for data data capture. So we'll accept invoices in PDF, Word, Excel, scanned document or .html. Now, with schools and with trusts, there's different ways that you might choose to set up your Compleat system, depending on how you're using your ERP or accounting software. So one thing to highlight is that Compleat is fully multi-company and multi-entity enabled. So you can see I'm currently in one company, but I can actually switch between different companies that I have set up. Now, with different companies, you can have multiple different email addresses. So if you are working with 5 entities within your accounting software, you could then set up 5 companies within iComplete with 5 different email addresses to determine which company or which school, depending on how you're set up, that invoice needs to go through to. So that's our capture process. And finally, just another piece of housekeeping on the homepage. What you'll see under credit information is a summary of the number of credits we have remaining for invoice processing. And that relates to what we call transaction credits. And those are pre-purchased and allocated to your account. Every invoice that goes through the data capture tool has a transaction credit cost associated to it. And one invoice processed equals 1 transaction credit, regardless of the number of pages, the value of the invoice, or the number of line items on that invoice. 1 invoice process equals 1 transaction credit. So you just have a view as to how many you've got remaining, and you can top up at any time. Okay, so where I would like to start the presentation today is to take you through one of the easiest ways that you can raise a purchase request or a purchase order within Compleat. Now, we do have the option to do that manually, but for today's example, I'm going to look at one of our integrated suppliers. Now, with integrated suppliers, some of these may be familiar to you, ones that you're using already. Today, I'm just going to use Amazon Business as an example, but it's important to explain that any supplier we have an integration with here works in a very similar way. So if I click on my Amazon Business logo, I'm ready to start my purchase request. Now, what the system will do is take me from Compleat directly into the Amazon Business website, and it will validate the Amazon Business account I'm logging into. And what that also means is that if you have, with Amazon Business or any of our other integrated suppliers, if you have preferential prices or restrictions around which items can and cannot be ordered by members of your team, then that's all inherited. The system has automatically logged me into my business's Amazon Business account. Now from here, I can just start to search as I would do normally on Amazon. So I'm just going to look for some A4 paper as an example. I'll select the item that I want to look at. I can update my quantity. All of that is as you would expect and as you would be familiar with. And I just start to build out my basket. Now, what you'll see is that instead of proceeding to checkout or just completing that purchase straight away, I do now have this option here to submit these items for approval. If I click that button, what the system will do is take the contents of that online supplier's website basket and pull that back through into Compleat for me. And what it's done, it's automatically populated a purchase request form. So the title is defined based on who the supplier is and the date. We've obviously identified who the supplier is. My delivery address is preset based on who I am as a user. I've got my delivery date, my currency code, all of that information has been defaulted for me. And what you'll see down under line items is that all of the item information from that Amazon basket, including the item code and description, have been pulled through and pre-populated for me. Unit cost, quantity, and obviously our net, VAT, and gross. What you'll also notice is that our analysis has been defaulted for us too. So it might be the case that when you have your staff raising purchase requests and purchase orders, that you want them to be allocating the appropriate financial coding. In our case, we're just using a tax code, an account code, and a department, and that's been defaulted for me, which is fantastic. The other thing that users can do at this stage is, if they need to, they've got the ability in the top right hand side to add attachments. So if I click on that, it might be the case that I have a quote from another supplier that we sometimes work with, and I want to browse and attach that quote. But actually I found it cheaper on Amazon, which is why I'm looking to make this purchase. Now, this quotation is just something that will be attached to the purchase request when it goes through the approval process. So something that might help the person that's reviewing this purchase request for approval determine whether they want to approve it or not. But really, from an end user's perspective, all they have to do at this point is click to order. And that is sending that purchase request through a predefined approval workflow. You can see that that order's now been submitted. And what the system will do is pull me into my Manage Orders area. And I've got a number of different tray pages, the first of which is our saved tray. So these are orders or purchase requests that I have started but haven't completed. So potentially I want to come back to these. I then have my submitted tray. So this shows me all of my purchase requests that I have completed and submitted and that are currently still out somewhere within my business waiting approval. I can see who the current approver is. I can still interact with this order. If I need to, I can recall this purchase request. And if I just click into one of these to show you what it looks like, what we'll see is that currently there is no attachment on this purchase request, and that's because it's still in draft mode, it's still in requisition stage. And what we start to build out for every single transaction is what we call an approval timeline. So I can see the user that submitted this purchase request and the date and time. I can see where it currently is in the approval process and whether or not it has yet been sent through to the supplier. So obviously this is still waiting approval. It's not yet been sent to the supplier. And as I say, if for any reason I no longer want to order these items, until this purchase request has been approved and becomes a fully fledged purchase order, I can recall that transaction. So what I will just touch on now is the approval workflow process and how those can be built out within the system. So within configuration, I will just jump into our manage workflow area. Now, when we're talking about workflow within Compleat, we're simply talking about the routing of a transaction, either an order or an invoice, through a predefined approval route, authorization route. And you can have as many approval workflows set up within your system as you like. That doesn't impact the cost or anything like that. So I'm just going to look at our finance department as an example. Now, when you build out the workflows, the first thing that you define is the transaction type that this workflow relates to. So is it a workflow that's just for your purchase orders and purchase requests? Is it just for your invoices and credit notes, which are handled and treated the same? Or actually, do you have sort of standardized workflow and approval processes where any transaction can come through this route? Now, in this example, I have a very straightforward junior finance to senior finance approval process. So we have position 1 here, which is junior finance. We've got one user there. So this will be the first person that receives a notification once a transaction has been submitted through this workflow. Now, once this user has approved that transaction, it will then go through to the person at position 2, which is our senior finance user. And again, they'll receive either an email notification or we also have a mobile application for approvals on the go. Now, at this stage, if it's a purchase request, that is when that draft request that we've just looked at becomes a fully approved purchase order document that's submitted through to the supplier automatically. If it's a purchase invoice that has come through this approval process, it's at this point that that invoice becomes fully approved and posts through the integration to your accounting software. Now, in terms of flexibility with the workflow, there's different ways that we can build these out depending on your needs and requirements. So the first thing that I can do is look to add an additional user within a single step in a workflow. Now, what that means is by adding multiple people within the same position, I've created an approval group. And the concept is both users will receive a notification at the same time, but because they've been configured in the workflow within a group, only one of them needs to approve it before it progresses on to the next step in the workflow. So it's a first come, first serve kind of approval process. Now, if I remove Katrina from there and actually create a secondary step here, and I might call this senior finance, and we might have a London school. Let's add Katrina in there. Now, what that does is sets the approval steps up simultaneously or in parallel. So the concept is very similar in that both users or groups of users will receive a notification at the same time that there's a transaction that requires their approval. But because they've been set up simultaneously and in parallel, they would both need to approve it at this position before it progressed on to the next step in the process. And the reason that can be really useful is because you can configure different conditions and criteria against steps in the workflow. So for example, if any of these conditions are met, And I might say that if the line, so I can select a field at header or at line level, if the line item department in my case is equal to our school in London, then this user needs to see that transaction. Now, what that means is that any transaction that comes through this workflow, whether it's not a line item coded to London, will circumvent prompting or requiring approval from that user and continue through the rest of the process. Now, what this should enable you to do is reduce the number of workflows that you need to have within the system and actually build out the intelligence either during your implementation or over time, and enable the system to dynamically route your transactions through the workflow for you based on these predefined rules, reducing the number of workflows required, reducing the decision making that either the person raising a purchase request or from an accounts payable perspective, sending invoices out for approval, reducing the decision making required at that point. Now, finally, we might have, say, a business manager at the end of the process. So just add Rory in there. And the other type of criteria that we can configure is a value threshold. So value thresholds within Compleat are a lower limit. So in this example, if the net value of the transaction is £1,000 or above, then our business manager in this case needs to see it. Anything less than £1,000, therefore, will just continue through the process. So you can be really clever and really flexible with how you build out these approval workflows. So with that in mind, I'm just going to jump back into our manage orders area. And what we'll be able to see, we saw that we could submit our purchase request. And what will then happen is that we'll go out to an approver. They will determine whether they want to approve or deny that request. And once it has been fully approved, it will land in our approved tray. Now, with Amazon, for example, if I click into this purchase request, which is now a purchase order, what you'll see is that this has been self-approved. So I have a threshold set up with Amazon that says I can order anything from Amazon up to the value of £10. Anything over £10 would need additional approval. So that request that we made just now for the A4 paper has gone and been automatically approved, and an order has successfully been issued electronically on this date and time back to Amazon Business. And the way that works with integrated suppliers is we effectively go back out to that basket and complete that purchase, provide the supplier, in this case Amazon Business, with this unique purchase order reference number. And what that means then is that any invoice or invoices that come through for that order, we can start to automatically match those off against the order that's been raised. Now, with a supplier like Amazon, as I say, that's all automated and done electronically. For any other suppliers that you're working with where you manually raise those purchase requests, this is what the purchase order document or the purchase order PDF will actually look like, and that will be issued via email directly to your supplier once that request has been approved. And this is slightly customizable. You can update obviously your logo, your colors, and you can add things like terms and conditions on there if need be. But that is how we can raise orders within the system. Now, once your orders have been submitted, potentially you might need to receipt for those orders. That might be a step in the process that you have. So you want to confirm receipt of goods before those invoices are processed. So once an order has been approved, you can click into one of your orders, and what you'll see is you can review your original purchase order lines. You can review any lines that are still open, any lines that have already been receipted, and any lines which have been cancelled. So if I go to open lines, this is really straightforward. I've just ordered one laptop here. On the right hand side, I can tick, and I've got the option now to cancel that line out, remove it from my commitments if I know, if the suppliers let me know that item isn't going to arrive, or I can say, yeah, actually I have received this item. So I can key in a receipt reference. I can again add an attachment if I've got a delivery note or anything I want to add here, and then I can determine what I am actually receipting for. So if I'd ordered 4 laptops and 3 arrived, I could update the quantity to partially receipt, but in this case I've ordered 1 laptop, 1's arrived, and I'm happy to receipt for that. So what you'll see is that we've now fully receipted this order, no lines cancelled, but we also have no open lines, everything's been receipted. So now if I jump back to the grid, you'll see we have our approved tray of orders, but also our receipted tray from an ordering perspective. And you can turn receipting on at a supplier by supplier level. Obviously, there might be certain things that you don't need to receipt for, but it's a really useful additional step to confirm the status of the invoice, either two-way matching just against the order or three-way matching against the receipted portion of that order as well. Okay, so I will jump back to our homepage now and we can look at the other side of the process, which is when our invoices come in. So as I explained, you might set up the system in different ways. Multiple companies might have multiple email addresses, but ultimately your invoices need to come through to one of those email addresses for data capture, and they will be delivered down into Compleat, into your Manage Invoices area. So if I click into my Manage Invoices, what I'll be presented with is a number of different tray pages in a very similar format to what we saw with our purchase orders. And the first tray that we will come to is the unprocessed tray. And the unprocessed tray is our first look at invoices that have gone through the data extraction process. They land in unprocessed because they require some form of interaction. And you'll see each line here is representative of an invoice, and the status we can see relates to the purchase order match. So we might have an invoice come in that's a full match. We might have one where there is actually no purchase order number. And actually, if we know that we are raising orders with that supplier and potentially the supplier's just neglected to put the PO number on that invoice, I can actually look to find a purchase order. We'll also flag if we identify any duplicate invoices. So we will use the unique supplier reference or invoice number that the supplier provides as part of that data capture process and cross-reference that against all other invoices within the system to ensure that that is unique. So we will flag any suspected duplicates and you can determine how you want to proceed. You might also be prompted that receipting is outstanding. So for this supplier, we require receipting. The invoice is matching and is relating to an order that hasn't yet been receipted. So you would then need to go and prompt the person that ordered that to determine whether they had received those items. But best case scenarios, your invoices are coming in and they're matching to your purchase orders. But also a point to make here is that if you're not looking at raising purchase orders, you can just use Compleat from an accounts payable perspective. You can just process your invoices through, process those direct invoices and get them approved at invoice stage. That's absolutely fine. But I'll click into our top invoice. So we can see that an invoice has come in to match the order that we've raised with Amazon Business for our A4 paper. And I can see my flag at the top, it's fully matched. And what we have here is page 1 of 2. And page 1 is a summary overview of the data that's been extracted from the invoice through our capture tool. And here is all of our header information, our invoice date. Obviously, we've identified who the supplier is. We've captured that supplier reference so we can carry out that check. And we've got our net VAT and gross values. Now, we can also review the purchase order document itself that the system has matched our invoice to, which is fantastic. And I can also see that our supplier bank details are valid. So depending on the type of integration that you're using, if you are holding supplier bank details within your ERP or accounting software, and the supplier is adding or providing bank details on the invoice itself, as part of the data capture process, we will capture those bank details, cross-reference those against the supplier record and let you know whether those are valid or not. So very useful, just as a flag if your supplier has changed their bank details and not told you, but also increasingly important from an anti-fraud perspective. And what you'll see here is now we have our line items that have been extracted from the invoice. And that goes down to the item code, the item description, obviously our cost, quantities, etc. And what you'll also see again is that our analysis, our account code, tax code and department as we're using it have been defaulted for me. Now these codes and the structure of the coding will be based on how your coding is structured within your accounting software. But again, we have been able to default the coding and that could be based on the order and how the order was coded, or it could be based on an accounts payable default that we have against this particular supplier. And I'll come on to show you how we can do that. If for any reason I need to interact with this coding or if there is coding missing because we haven't defaulted it, the first way that I can do that is to interact via quick actions. So what I might want to do is just update my department and say, actually, this shouldn't be allocated to London, this should be allocated to Norwich. And I can click on each individual line. I can click the top button there, which will allocate that code across all of the lines that we've captured from the invoice. I can click OK and just update that code. If I click edit, this will take me through to page 2 of 2. And on this page, I can see my PDF invoice. So this is the invoice that the Compleat Capture technology has received and extracted the data from. And what we'll also provide you is a copy of any supporting documentation. So in this case, it's just the body of the email from the supplier. But if you've got tickets or delivery notes coming through alongside the invoice, we can deliver those down alongside your invoice as a supporting document. What we then have on the right hand side here is just a further breakdown of the data that we looked at on our first page. So H here is for all of our header information. So you can see we've correctly mapped to the right supplier within my finance system. You can see our supplier reference check has been carried out. There's no flag there. And also, if you need to, the AP person or your finance administrator can add a comment prior to sending this invoice out for approval if need be. What you can also do at this stage is jump down into every line that we've captured from the invoice. So every invoice we receive, we will capture at header and line level. And again, if you need to interact with the coding in any way, you can do so at this stage too. So actually, changed my mind. This was actually for London. I can switch that back and click save. Now, jumping back to header, I mentioned just a moment ago the ways in which we can default the coding portion of the process. And we talked about it at order stage. We can do the same at an AP stage, at invoice stage. And one of the first ways to do that is to use this tool here, which is to map supplier defaults. So you might have a scenario where you know that every time you receive an invoice through from Amazon Business, that you're just ordering office stationery for them. So that needs to be coded to office stationery. It's always going to be in pounds sterling, for example. It might always relate to a particular department or particular location or school and your tax code. And you can build out as far as defining the actual approval workflow that invoice would need to go through. So what that means is your best case scenario from a finance point of view is now your invoice goes into the system for data capture. It's delivered down into iComplete and it's matched off against an order that's been raised. What we'll then do is allocate all of your default coding and we can then submit it automatically through the appropriate approval workflow, which means that you're not having to interact with that invoice at all. So from an unprocessed tray perspective, where we started this invoice side of things, that unprocessed tray will just become an exception management tool. Your staff members should only be interacting with invoices that require some kind of intervention. Maybe they're a part match against an order, maybe there's a certain code missing that needs to be allocated. But you can really look to automate as much of your very common purchases and invoices as possible using even just the supplier default mapping. We also have some advanced ways that you can default based on information such as the line item code or the line description that we're capturing from an invoice. So lots of ways to explore how automation can be achieved. On this occasion, though, what I will do is use our submit button. So as with my order that I raised earlier, I do need to submit this invoice for approval. If I click my submit button, you'll see I've got a number of different available approval workflows from an invoice side of things that I can choose from. So I'm just going to send this through to our department head's approval workflow. And what you'll see is that invoice has now been submitted. And what the system will do is just pull me through to the next transaction within the unprocessed tray that requires my attention. And you can see here, these lines are jumping out in red for me because I need to complete the coding before I can submit for approval. So again, I could interact using our quick actions button. If I jump back to the grid, I can then pick out any invoice transaction that I want to interact with. And also when we're reviewing the unprocessed tray, if you do have multiple companies set up, you have the flexibility from a permissions perspective, but you also have the flexibility from a user interaction perspective. So currently I'm looking at all records for multiple different companies. If I wanted to just view records for one company or two of my companies, then I can define that at this stage as well, providing I've got the permissions to do so. Now, again, if I click into my submitted tray, we will see that our Amazon Business invoice has been submitted for approval. I can see it's currently with our head of IT. And again, as with orders, with invoices, you have the ability as a finance user to interact with that invoice prior to it being fully approved. So I can recall that transaction if I need to. I can click into that invoice. I can go through and interrogate that approval timeline, and I can see the user that submitted it, the date and time, and where it currently is in the approval process. So with that in mind, I am going to very quickly log off and log back in as our head of IT and just go through that invoice approval process. Now, as I mentioned, when a transaction is submitted for approval, the first approver in that workflow will receive an email notification if you have that configured, or they will receive a push notification on the mobile app. And what they'll do is they'll be prompted to log into their Compleat system. And you can see with Rory, he has a reduced number of quick links and tiles based on his user permissions and based on areas that are valuable and interesting and required for his particular role. So if I go into Rory's Manage Invoices, what we'll see is, again, he's got a reduced number of tray pages to interact with. And the first one is the awaiting approval tray. So Rory will go into this invoice that we've just submitted, and as an approver, he can see all the very same information that we've just reviewed. So all of the header data, that it's matched to an order. They can see that the bank details are valid. They can see all of the line item data and descriptions, costs, quantities, as well as the analysis. And again, they have that second page to click through to review the documents and timeline, which includes the actual PDF invoice itself. Again, the supporting documents are there for them to review, and then they have access to that approval timeline. So they would also be able to see if anyone else had approved this transaction prior to them receiving it, also with any comments. From here, this user just needs to determine whether they want to approve this invoice or not. So you'll see down the bottom here, we've got the options to approve or deny, and I can add a comment. So if I click to add a comment, click to approve, and just say that's all fine, click to approve that invoice, you can see that invoice has now been approved, and it's removed it from my awaiting approvals tray into the approved tray. And it'll take a few moments, but what you'll see is that the invoice at this stage will post through to our integrated accounting software. And we'll actually pull back a number associated to that posting as well. So you've got that complete end-to-end audit of the journey. So we'll post the header and line data, either a link to the PDF or the physical PDF itself, depending on your ERP or accounting software. And then for every invoice within the system, your documents and timeline will be complete. So you will then see your full approval timeline, the user that submitted it for approval from a finance perspective, the person or persons that approved it, the dates and times they approved it with any comments, and then the actual date and time it was posted through to your integrated accounting software, and the journal or posting number related to that transaction. So you've got that complete process. Okay, so before I finish up the demonstration, I will just jump back to our primary user, Katrina. And I will just take you through some of our out-of-the-box reports that are available within the system. So if I click onto my reports tile, you can see we have two key types of reports. So the first is an activity-based report. So this is looking at the number of invoices per day, who's the key culprit for sitting on approvals, for example. So this is very much sort of system management reports. What I like to focus on is our financial reports, as these tend to be the most valuable. Now, the first I'll click on is supplier spend. So I mentioned earlier when we spoke about the complete circle, our advanced spend analytics. Now, advanced spend analytics is an additional interpretation of data separate from the reports that we have within the system. But what you can have straight away, even from a free level within the tool, is you can select the supplier, you can select the period that you want to look at, and you've got a really quick, easy look, very high level at what's being spent with that supplier. And this is across the particular company that you're in. I can then interrogate a particular month. In this case, it will present me with a list of those invoices. If I click the plus button, I can actually review the line item. Or if I click the line itself, I can go down and review the actual invoice document. Now, with the integrated reports within the system, these are exportable to Excel, so you can utilize these elsewhere. But with supplier spend, this really is a very light touch first look at how you're reviewing your spend. The advanced spend analytics tool takes that tenfold, looking at extending your general ledger functionality with procurement standard categories and identifying where savings could be made across different areas, whether it's based on the number of pupils per school or the number of staff per school. You can really build that out by location and see where there are cost savings to be made. Now, the other report I will just touch on is the accruals report. Now, this is really important because your Compleat system will be holding information that's not yet reached through to your accounting software. So what you can do is review the number of purchase orders that have been approved that don't yet have a matching invoice through. Anything that is partially matched, so any orders where there are elements still outstanding, and then any invoices that are still pending approval, or I can look at everything. So again, I can select the company that I want to look at, which in your case might be a location or a school, and then I can select the period that I want to review. So what did I need to accrue for the last 3 months? What are we looking at? And again, I can show all transactions for a period, or I can click into a particular week commencing date in this case and review that information, export to Excel, etc. So really that is just a nice first look at the Compleat system and the purchase to pay process end to end. So I will just jump back into my presentation. And I will switch my camera back on so you can see that I am still here. Fantastic. So really to finish up today and to summarise, Compleat enables a really compelling return on investment, ultimately realised in 2 ways. The first is through efficiency savings of up to 90% through automating those manual processes, and it gives you the ability to better utilise your existing and obviously very valuable resource. The second is to identify and realise your cost saving potential. And this has really been seen in feedback from some of our key customers in this sector. So Whitehorse Federation, for example, adopted online buying to control and reduce their costs. And because of the optimised user experience, which automated purchasing directly with online suppliers they were already working with, already familiar with, they had a 100% end user adoption across nearly 300 members of staff, which is fantastic. And one of their biggest takeaways was that they could now save money through using Compleat, but also save that really essential time within their accounts payable function to focus on those more important activities. Okay, so that is the end of my presentation this morning. So thank you so much to everyone for joining. We do have a few moments left for Q&A. So just bear with me. I will have a look in the chat to see if anyone has popped in any questions. If you haven't submitted a question yet and you would like to, now is your chance. So please feel free to do so in that chat box. Okay, fantastic. We've had a question through from Rachel, and they have asked, can you integrate with Sage for Education? Thank you for that question, Rachel. Yes, we can. So as I mentioned earlier, Compleat solutions are ERP and accounting software agnostic, and as such, we have ways to integrate with almost all key solutions. Some of the most common that we see in this sector are, Xero for Education, Sage for Education, Accounts IQ, Sage Intact, PS Financials, and all of those we have great experience working with. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question, Rachel. Okay. Right, we've had a question come through from Joy. Joy has asked, why is approval needed for a 3-way match, and can alerts be sent to users when orders need receipting? It's a great question, Joy. Ultimately, approvals aren't needed for a 3-way match. So you could build out the system and create a rule set that says if the invoice comes in and matches a receipted order, that doesn't require additional approval. That is effectively ready to be posted through to your finance system. And yes, you can configure a notification and alert to a user that requires that where there's an order that's outstanding receipting that finance have had the invoice through for. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you, Joy. Another question through from Ian. Ian has asked, do you have to allocate account codes to all the items on the supplier's website or restrict items purchasable? No, you don't. So with those purchase requests and those purchase orders, those are effectively layouts or templates that are defined. So it might be the case that you don't require your purchase requisitioners to allocate account codes to every item. It might be that you just remove that coding responsibility from the purchase order layout, and that coding is then managed from an accounts payable, from an invoice perspective. Another thing that you can do is also restrict which suppliers users or groups of users can interact with. So I hope that that helps answer your question, Ian. Thank you. Okay, Joy has asked another question, which is, can order lines be partially matched, i.e. 10,000, 2,000 billed, etc.? So the way that the matching works at the moment is a header level match. And what that means is that we're matching the invoice to the order based on 3 key things. The first is the purchase order number, the second is who the supplier is, and the third is the overall value of the invoice to the order. So ultimately, yes, you can partially match, and what that means is that the invoice will come in and it will partially match an order. The order will be flagged as a part matched, the invoice will be flagged as a part match, and that invoice can be processed through as a part matched invoice, and then you will have the remaining value of that order that can be drawn down against as additional invoices come through against that order. So I really hope that answers your question. Thank you, Joy. Yes, Joy, to add to your comment, yes, you can partially receipt. You can receipt in part and match the invoice to the receipted portion, and then you could close off or receipt the rest of the order, and again manage that invoice process from the other side as well. Okay, I've just got one final question come through from John. Do you have any other integrated suppliers online? We use Office Team. Thank you for that question, John. And yes, we do. You saw some of our key education suppliers on screen today, from YPO, Lyrico, Brown's Books, Amazon Business, Commercial, and Office Team is actually a supplier we already integrate with as well. So ultimately, Compleat are really looking to continue to expand our available integrated suppliers and really welcome the opportunity to work with our customers to understand where there could be, additional key suppliers that you would like to see within your sector. But Office Team is one that we have already. So fantastic question. Thank you, John. Okay. Right. I'm conscious of time and would like to give everyone the chance to go and have maybe that last morning cup of coffee or head off for an early lunch. So unless there are any further questions, a couple of questions through. Another one from Marlene. You use Sage 50. Is this also compatible? Yes, it is, Marlene. Absolutely. Thank you for asking. Another question from Natasha: how the system work for utility bills, etc. We would just capture the invoice or your utility bill, and that can be processed through as normal. Potentially you have a contract that you might want to set up on the system and have a blanket order for a 12-month period, and just draw down against that open order with the invoices that are processed through. So you've got different options there. Okay, fantastic. One last question through from Craig. Thank you, Craig. Craig's said all of our invoices are sent to the local authority for payment. Would this continue? Yes, it would. So the point at which Compleat stops interacting with the process is once we have posted that approved invoice through into your ERP or accounting software. So your current payment management process and approval process around payments and how that works will still be maintained separately from Compleat. So if you are sending all of those invoices to the local authority to get them paid, that would continue, yes. Craig, you're welcome, Craig. Where can you find a price list? So what we can do is that finishes us up quite nicely. So I will just jump into our final section. So really conscious of time. So the session today has been recorded and will be shared with you via email, but we will also be inviting you to book an initial scoping call with one of our consultants and potentially have a personalised demonstration for your school or trust. So in terms of the pricing, we would need to bespoke quote you for that price, Craig, and that will be based on kind of a couple of key areas. The first would be the number of users that you would require to have access to the software, and that would be your finance team, any purchase requisitioners if you wanted to use purchase ordering, and anyone, department heads, budget holders, teachers that would be approving orders or invoices as well. So that would be your user number. The second piece of information that we would need to know is that the number of invoices that you're processing roughly on a monthly or an annual basis. And that will enable us to quote you for the number of transaction credits we recommend that you would need to cover off that volume. And transaction credits just relate to the data capture and processing of invoices. It's really clear to explain that the purchase order tool is part of the software subscription. There's no additional costs associated to each purchase order that's generated. So I really invite you to reach out to us following the email that will come to you this afternoon to arrange a call with myself or one of the team to discuss your school or your trust's requirements and maybe get a conversation and demonstration booked in. We will also be sharing with you the Whitehorse Federation case study that's been referenced today. So really just thanks ever so much to everyone for joining. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate all the questions, and we look forward to speaking to you all soon. So take care and have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you.